these experiences are the seminal experiences that made me realize that my connection with the earth and with animals was, I much later found language for it, was my connection with the divine. And of course, I didn't grow up in the church. That wasn't part of our family's culture. Sometimes went to church if a neighbor or a teacher or somebody that my mother worked with would take us. But mostly my sense of joy and safety was climbing trees, being with livestock that lived next door, playing out in the dirt, this kind of thing. So I left home when I was 16. My dad kicked me out. He kicked all of us out when we were children, not because we were bad kids. I mean, I had good grades and tried to be responsible, but it was because of his mental health issues and his addictions. And I was then forced to marry a man with mental illness and from a religiously shame-based family. And that was the beginning of my journey into Christian theology, this being in that environment. Today we have 34 acres. There are 3 houses and 2 tiny houses, barns and outbuildings, chickens, goats, cows. We have a robust children's ministry, family ministry on Wednesday mornings that's interfaith and multicultural around food and wellness and farming, and it's called Grow It. And we have 40 or 50 people every week coming to that, and we have a team of 7 people leading it, and from different countries and different racial backgrounds and economic backgrounds. They're the lead team for that, including a full-time chef and a part-time chef and some other folks with really great skills. Getting ready to start a farm-based preschool that will meet 3 times a week from one of the moms that comes to Grow It. And we also grow a lot of food for the food bank, and we started in 2025 free farmers markets for refugee families because the food the programs were cut in January of 2025 and these families were desperate. And so I went around and raised money from all the people I knew and kind of asked them to support it, and we raised $20,000, and it was enough to provide fresh, organic, beautiful produce for 20 families for most of the year. And we want to do that again this year. We also have a regular CSA where people subscribe and they come and get their veggies and eggs and fruit. We have morning prayer Monday through Friday from 8 to 8:30, which is a beautiful group. If everybody showed up at the same time, there'd probably be 40 people on that, maybe 50. We use a Celtic liturgy for that, and that's the heart of our worship life together is morning prayer. Well, I have a little mantra that I use in teaching, and I try to live this way for a very long time, is show up, pay attention, cooperate with God, and release the outcome. And by cooperate with God for people who are non-deistic, I just talk about cooperating with love. What is loving and healing for our neighbors and for the earth? So show up, pay attention interiorly to my immediate context, to the larger context of our community, to the larger context of the world. So the prayer is really about showing up. It's about paying attention, cooperating with what fosters love, what is of love, and then release the outcome of that cooperation. Just trustfully release it. You don't have to be in charge of the outcome. And that's a way of life. That's a contemplative way of life.
Hello, everyone. For those of you who are new to my channel, welcome. And for those of you who are subscribed to JSpeaks, thank you so much and welcome back. As you know, it is my mission, it is my passion to bring to you all conversation topics that are positive, motivational, educational, and informational. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy to be here with Dr. Elaine Heath, consultant, author, retreat leader, speaker, Abbess, and farmer. Dr. Elaine Heath has had an amazing life journey, even growing up in poverty with many hard experiences, including having to leave home and find her way as a junior in high school. After earning her PhD in theology, she became ordained in the United Methodist Church, and for 11 years she worked as a professor at Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University, and as professor and dean of missional and pastoral theology at Duke Divinity School at Duke University. However, she retired from Duke University in order to develop, live at, and serve as lead farmer and abbess at Spring Forest, which is a monastic community located in Hillsborough, North Carolina. The community operates a small regenerative farm that produces thousands of pounds of food each year to help those who are struggling with food insecurity, along with a traditional community-supported agriculture subscription service. Spring Forest also offers a myriad of agritourism experiences and hosts many spiritual formation ministries, children's programs, and much, much more. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit back, relax, and most importantly, listen. And hopefully after today's episode, you understand for yourself that Spring Forest is at the forefront of a new reformation, one that is freeing the Christian faith from the sinful structures of patriarchy, racism, classism, many phobias, and extreme evangelism and mission. Whereas the new reformation is all about the emergence of a generous, hospitable, and equitable form of Christianity, one that is healing the wounds of this world. So, Dr. Elaine, how are you?
I'm happy. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm happy to see you, happy to be rekindled with you.
Likewise.
So how's everything been since the last time we spoke?
Well, the farm slowed down. We finished our growing season in November, and by then everybody's pretty worn out that work on the farm. So we have sort of slow time, the end of November through December and into early January. That's time where we can, on the farm, we can repair fences, we can tally up how much we grew and where it went, and there's some bookkeeping and sort of logistical things we can do. And then starting next week, all the growing preps start up again. We were going to start some seeds. We have to put our plan together for 2026 and get our marketing together for our CSA and fundraising for our people who donate so we can have free farmers markets and supply the food bank.
Beautiful, beautiful. So talk about a little bit about that growth that you were describing in 2025 up until now.
The growth of the community,
Spring Forest, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of interesting things are happening, and it's all growing organically. I mean that both literally and, symbolically, I'd say. So last year, we implemented some new organic growing methods, and the quality and quantity of our produce increased by like fourfold with less labor, which was amazing. And out of our improved growing methods and some other things, we met a number of new people, some of whom subscribed to our CSA, some of whom came to a really fun arts event that we had in the fall called the Venetian Carnival. And out of those new relationships, we're forming a nucleus of people now who are creatives that we've met, who care about the future of this planet and care about local neighbors. And so we're getting ready to put together a sort of a collective of creative type people. We'll get together and have a meal and do some brainstorming, but what I'm envisioning is for 2026, we'll beta test a monthly gathering around creativity and spirituality, and different people can present, can lead, and I'm hoping will spark imaginations and connections. on a local level that can benefit our local communities through all sorts of art and creativity and care for the earth and care for our neighbors. So those are some things that happened.
So talk about the growing methods, the new growing methods that you came across, because I read on your website that that Spring Forest produces thousands of pounds of food each year.
Yes.
So are we in the tens of thousands, or are we still in the upper below 10,000?
Yeah. So this year we produced a little over 8,000 pounds of vegetables
with the new
with
growing,
the new growing methods.
as opposed to what would it be like 2024?
Probably 50,000 pounds. I mean, 5,000 pounds. Yeah. So we're up to about 8,000 pounds. And of the 8,000 pounds of really top quality produce, organically grown, we're not certified, but we use organic methods. 64% of that went to people who are experiencing food insecurity.
Beautiful.
So we offered free farmers markets for refugee families through a partnership with World Relief. Those free farmers markets included cooking classes from our own chef, Chef Netta, so that folks could get used to some vegetables they might not have had before in their own cultures. And we also grew culture-specific vegetables for people from Afghanistan. Many of the folks that we've been befriending and companioning as they come to this country are from Afghanistan. So we did that. And then we also have a local food bank, the OCIM, which is the Orange Congregations and Mission. It's an ecumenical food bank with its hub in Hillsborough. And so we contributed several thousand pounds of food to the food bank.
Nice. Yeah. So what exactly are the growing methods, though?
Oh, well, you want to make sure the soil is as healthy as possible. So you attend to crop rotation so that you're reducing your possibility of pests. Interplanting, so you might plant onions and radishes alongside your eggplant to reduce the pest load. Ways to suppress weeds through the use of fabric and other methods, displacing weeds with lettuce that you grow that you can eat, but it also has a shallow root structure and it shades out the weeds. So there are a number of things like that that then when you suppress your weed load, you also automatically suppress the pest load. So we think that we reduced both of them about 85% this last year, by
85%.
Putting in some new methods and just staying on top of it, having a good schedule and staying on top of it.
And has the actual property of Spring Forest increased as well too?
Yes.
To accommodate more food?
Well, we have not increased our growing beds. We did increase some of our land and resources this past year. And the growing beds, we have 1 acre, 1 acre. And we have capacity to grow for a lot more families. We just need to increase our labor capacity, and we'll be able to do that.
Beautiful. Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Elaine, I'm excited for today's interview. This is my second time talking with you, second time meeting you. But I'm excited for our audience to get to know you a little bit better. Sure. So before we start our official interview, please, take a moment to, spell out all that transpired leading up to you being the lead farmer and Abbess at Spring Forest. And also, if you don't mind, talk about your childhood as well, because it's to my understanding that it was tough. Mm-hmm. It was rough, to say the least. Mm-hmm. And what you dealt with back then inspired you to do what you're doing now. So please, however much you want to share.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was born in 1954, the middle child of 5, and 7 years younger than my oldest brother, and 7 years older than my sisters, who are twins. When my sisters were born, within a few weeks, I became their primary caregiver, and I was 7 years old. And so I had a lot of responsibility and was very protective of them. My parents had a lot of struggle coming from their families of origin, and these things are passed down generationally. And my dad had PTSD from the war, and I think he went into the war with PTSD, just circumstances growing up in the Depression and so on. But we lived in poverty. My mom was a nurse. She was the primary wage earner. And because of addictions and all the mental health issues that go with addictions, we moved a lot. We moved over and over. So I rarely finished school in the same school in all of my growing up years, up until, I just rarely did. I didn't go to the same junior high school. I went to 2 high school. I mean, it was just like multiple. Some years when I was in elementary school, I went to 3 schools and didn't finish the school year in a school. So there was that sort of rootlessness and many deficits in my life and my siblings' lives. By the way, my sister and I wrote a memoir about this called Loving the Hell Out of Ourselves, a memoir, where we tell our story of how we recovered, how we helped each other to recover. And she's a therapist today. Janine Heath McGlynn is her name. But anyway, the places where I found solace and where I found respite and joy when I was a child growing up, from my earliest memory, had to do with being outdoors. It had to do with seeing dappled light in the trees. I remember as just a toddler just feeling joy at seeing dappled light in the trees, or seeing the light slanting through the forest on the moss, on the rock beneath the trees. Sometimes along the way we lived adjacent to farms and farmers, and I loved the farms. These were little small holdings, and when I was in the 3rd grade in particular, there was a family that lived up the road from us. We usually lived in rural environments. Anyway, their last name was Hogg, H-O-G-G, and I remember thinking that was funny because they had hogs, it just seemed like to my little child mind. But they were really kind to me, and they had a daughter that was the same age as me, and I just loved playing up there. I loved their chickens, I loved their cows, and one time Mr. Hogg gave me a chicken. I think it was ready for the stew pot or something, but he gave it to me to take home because he knew I was in love with his chickens. And I brought it home, and we had a little shed, and I put the chicken in the shed, and the next morning there was an egg, and I thought that was great. And the next morning the chicken was gone. I don't know if my brother let it out or what happened, but it disappeared. But these experiences are the seminal experiences that made me realize that my connection with the earth and with animals was, I much later found language for it, was my connection with the divine. And of course I didn't grow up in the church. That wasn't part of our family's culture. Sometimes went to church if a neighbor or a teacher or somebody that my mother worked with would take us. But mostly my sense of joy and safety was climbing trees, being with livestock that lived next door, playing out in the dirt, this kind of thing. So I left home when I was 16. My dad kicked me out. He kicked all of us out when we were children, not because we were bad kids. I mean, I had good grades and tried to be responsible, but it was because of his mental health issues and his addictions. And I was then forced to marry a man with mental illness and from a religiously shame-based family. And that was the beginning of my journey into Christian theology, was being in that environment. I was married to him for 23 years. He was abusive, and but along the way, I came to faith myself. And along the way, I found friends who became my chosen family. And it was in the context of a friendship like that when I was in my early 30s. I lived in Canada at the time, in London, Ontario, and I was a part of a big Pentecostal church at that time. My kids were in elementary school. That was that season of my life. And I met a woman named Betty Jevons. She was on the staff of this church, and I'd never met anybody like her, especially being in a very conservative church environment where women are supposed to just be quiet and submissive, and, the men are in charge of everything. She wasn't like that at all. She wasn't strident or anything, or what you might think, but she was just her own person. And I know now, because I've had all these years of education subsequently and a lot of reading and so on, she was a true mystic. And she took me under her wing and began mentoring me. She didn't tell me that. She just started doing it. I kept wondering, why does she want to have coffee with me? I don't know anything. She was on the staff at this church. She worked with women in particular, but also did some pastoral counseling and things like that with people. So she just started asking me to accompany her on all the things that she did. And she would treat me like I was her partner or something, which I just couldn't understand because I was young and nervous and introverted and really shy around people. She also asked me to come to this small group of women she led, and she said, "It's the Tuesday group for special ladies." And I said, "Oh, what's it for?" And she said, "We don't advertise this group." And right away in my mind, I'm thinking, this is a group for people with real problems. This is a group for defective people, because I still have a lot of shame inside because I hadn't begun to come to terms with the violence that I experienced my whole life. But I said, I don't know, But she kept after me, and finally she said, "Look," because I had said to her at one of our coffee times that I was reconnecting with God in a very profound way. I felt like I had crossed a threshold of some kind of commitment and intimacy with God. So she finally got me to come to that group by asking me to come and tell my story to the group, like what was happening inside of me with my journey. And so I finally agreed, and I go to this group, and I found my kindred spirits there. So these were other women like myself who had very difficult home life because of various things, and yet were really, really committed to a deep spiritual life that would order their days. And Betty in that group was the teacher, so she would teach, and then she also could provide pastoral care to us. And that day that I went that first time, and I told the women, I was so nervous. I remember my mouth was dry, and I could hardly make eye contact. I told them some of my story and how my husband was violent, and that I longed for freedom in my life and peace. And then I explained as best I could what I was beginning to experience of God giving me freedom and peace inwardly, even in a difficult outward situation. And at the end of the session, these women all got around me and started crying. And they said, "You've really spoken to our hearts." And I was so surprised because I just felt like nothing, like I had a lot of shame inside. So I just felt unworthy all the time, that kind of thing. Well, that was when I realized that these women were like kindred spirits to me. And so I started to go to this group. And Betty was the most remarkable teacher of scripture and teacher of prayer. She really helped me learn how to pray. And so after a year, she asked me to lead the group. Like she's lost her mind. I said, "I can't do that. I don't know anything." And she said, "No," she said, "I'm tired. I need to take a break." She was not tired. But this was her way of kind of... So she talked me into it, and this friend, Mary Ann, would make coffee and welcome people and take up an offering for the babysitter that took care of everybody's children. So I started to lead this group, and I would just labor for many hours through the week getting ready to do a 30-minute teaching. I play guitar. I play classical guitar also. And so I would bring my guitar and lead them through some simple songs, and then I would do this teaching. And then they would get into small groups and talk about what they were hearing and pray for each other. And then we would dismiss, and then from one week to the next, the women would help each other with their struggles, because there were a lot of struggles. So what was happening was I was becoming a pastor to these women, and I didn't know it. Like I didn't think of church in those terms. I thought of church as where there's a pastor and a pulpit and, pews and stuff. But we were doing spiritual formation together, and I was teaching them, and I felt like I was half a step ahead of them in terms of what I was preparing to teach. But it was really about walking in a life of love and peace and finding strength from God during really difficult circumstances, and how do we do that, So at the end of the year, there were, and also when I first started leading the group, most of the women quit coming because I wasn't Betty, and they were very attached to her. But then, so there were about 10 people left. And then after a few weeks, they started inviting people they knew, and soon we had 30 and 40 women coming, and they were literally from around the world, because we lived in London, Ontario, and there's a university there, University of Western Ontario, and they had come to the city because of jobs, or their partners had jobs at the university. So the character, the flavor of who was there and why they were there radically changed. So at the end of the year, 5 of these women came to me and said, we'd like you to baptize us, because we've realized through the year that we want to follow this way of Jesus the way you've described it to us. And I said, I don't know if I'm allowed to baptize people. This isn't the Pentecostal church, so you don't have to be ordained, or at least you didn't then, to do things that in, like the Methodist church, or sacraments, So I said, I'll ask Betty about that. So I went to Betty, and she said, oh, yeah, you can do it. She said, I'll help you. And I had a swimming pool at my house in the backyard. And so we had a baptism in my backyard, and Betty helped me baptize these women. And it was within a few days after that, I started having a series of call experiences, visions and dreams, and the sense of scriptures kind of coming alive and speaking to me very powerfully, all about giving my life fully to God's work in the world. And I saw in one of the visions that there would be 3 basic kinds of things that I would do. One of them would be to be an ordained pastor who would, be qualified to lead the church. I saw that I would be in academia. I would be preparing people for a different kind of ministry. I was already beginning to perceive this is the real expression of church, this sort of life together, community, supporting each other through thick and thin, eating together, rather than formal Sunday service kinds of things, because you can do that all your whole life and never have a relationship with God or your neighbors, right? So I was beginning to really get that, because that's what was healing my life. And so I saw that I would be preparing people for that kind of ministry. And then I saw myself speaking to larger groups that were not one particular church, but were leaders of different kinds of ministry, both lay people and clergy, and that whatever it was I was going to say to them would take effect. It would impact them in a good way. And I had this clear insight that came to me that I would be working in a mainline kind of context, not a conservative context. And at that time, I had learned from my conservative formation that mainline Christians, Methodists and Lutherans and so on, or they're not even Christians, nor are the Catholics. It was a sort of fundamentalist thinking. And so the thought that I was being called to that mainline was kind of shocking to me. So I went to Betty after 2 weeks of these experiences and told her about them, and I was so nervous. And she was a pretty serious person. Like, I never heard her giggle before, for example. She was a pretty serious person, and loving and warm and joyful, but not given to hilarity, let's say. Unlike myself, I'm a complete joker. But anyway, I am telling her these things, and she surprised me so much. She starts to laugh, like really hard. She starts laughing, little tears are coming out. She says, "Oh, Elaine, I saw this the day I met you. And I went home and wrote it in my journal, but I couldn't tell you about your call because you had to experience it for yourself." And she said, "God has shown me where you're going to go, and it's so amazing. It's so amazing." Then she never told me what she saw. she just said, then she was like Yoda then, like she's giving me these sort of bullet points for how to conduct my life in a way that would align best with what God is up to in the world. She said, "Never make your ministry about getting money. That ruins people. Always say yes to God, and God will always make a way for you, no matter what the obstacles are. always say yes. And she said, don't worry about your family. She said, if you'll keep saying yes and showing up to your call, God will make a way for your family too. What your kids need, whatever it is that you need. And she said, never make your ministry about being in the limelight. That ruins people. She kept telling me what ruins people. And just about really this life of complete devotion, of complete surrender and trust to the path that's opening before me. And on that account, she said, never push your way forward where you're not wanted and where you're not invited. She said, God will always give you some kind of John the Baptist to open the way for you. And if the way's not open, don't go there. And so I said yes. I said, I'll do my best to follow that guidance. I promised her that I would. And I've always tried to follow that guidance. Even today, I try to follow that guidance. And it's never steered me in the wrong direction. It's always been wise guidance for me. So the next step that was going to have to happen was I would need an education to be able to do those things, because I barely got out of high school. Remember, I was forced to get married when I was a junior in high school. I was 16 years old. And so it was probably like 2 weeks after I told Betty about the call experience, my husband at the time said he changed his job and we had to move back to the United States. We had to move to Detroit. And I wasn't consulted. I never was. I wasn't asked my opinion. And so we had to move. We had to move within a couple months. And I had to leave behind all those friends that were my support system and leave Betty behind. Of course, this is before you could, Zoom and have the internet and things. But we moved, and that began a process of my going to school. And I had to keep drawing a line in the sand with my abusive husband and say, I am going to get an education, because he didn't want me to go to school. He didn't want me to leave the house. I had no money of my own. I mean, it was really super controlling. So, but each time I would come up to this threshold, I knew, because of the strength of the call and because of Betty's affirmation and just the fruit of what happened with those women, I knew I was supposed to do this. And so I had courage from God to keep taking the next step. So I went to college while my kids were in junior high school. I went to a local state college, state university, and I graduated summa cum laude. I had the highest GPA in the history of that department, which really also shocked me, because, I'm still carrying this sort of shame around. And meanwhile, while I was going to college, I started to take a few classes around feminist theory and things like that, which completely blew my mind. And helped me to see my life in a different frame than the church frame that was fundamentalist. And as I took more classes and made friends with people who were outside of my husband's ability to manipulate and so on, I became more and more free and had better and better perspective. And so then when I graduated from the university, then I started seminary. I went to Ashland Seminary, which is in Ashland, Ohio, about, I want to say, 3.5-hour drive away from Detroit. So they had an extension program in Detroit at Wayne State University, so I would drive down there for some classes in the evening and made friends with all these wonderful pastors from the CME and AME and AME Zion backgrounds and Church of God in Christ. And so these were my buddies in these classes. And that was so wonderful. And then, so as I started seminary, again, it was a battle for every semester just to stand my ground. I got a job at Joann Fabric at minimum wage so I could pay for my tuition, and eventually got scholarships and so on. But that program at the time was a hybrid program. You had to do at least a year full-time residency on campus in Ohio. And so one thing led to another, and there was a professor and his wife. He was a professor of Hebrew Bible and, all the Semitic languages, David Baker. His wife, Morven, was the campus therapist who worked there for students. and I became friends with them. I was never Morven's client, but we just loved each other, and so they offered for me to stay in their home when I would commute down for 2 nights a week. My kids were in junior high and high school at this time, so that's what I did. I stayed in their home when I went down for classes, and it was there in the seminary where I realized, well, I received so much affirmation from students, the faculty, the staff, about my calling. I had never been in an environment so supportive of women. It was completely liberating. And here it was, a relatively conservative evangelical school at the time, but even that was more liberating than what I had experienced before. So I had lots of opportunities to speak and to lead formation groups and help people learn to pray and to use my gifts more and identify my gifts more. And then, meanwhile, through my friendship with Morven Baker, who left that job after a while and started the Women's Recovery Center in Ashland and ran it for several years. She was an expert, she still is an expert in recovery from sexual abuse and domestic violence, which that was my story, right? So out of friendship with her and then conversations with my sister Janine, who had started therapy to recover from her experiences of our childhood, I had this sort of coalescing of support with all these things happening, and I was finally able to leave my violent husband halfway through seminary, or 2/3 of the way through seminary. So that was a profound pivot point in my life, and it was at that point where one daughter was in college, the other one in high school. The one in high school came with me, and we moved to Ashland in a little apartment. And I got a job because I needed the income at a United Methodist Church running their youth program. And I found such a welcome in the United Methodist Church. People weren't discriminating against me because I was a woman or because I was divorced. In the fundamentalist church, if you get divorced for any reason other than your partner's sexual infidelity, they tell you you're going to hell, and that you can't ever get married again, no matter what the reason. There's no nuanced thinking. It was just very cruel. But that's not what the belief system was when I came among the Methodists, and I just found such grace and warmth and welcome. So that was how I ended up in the mainline church. It was through the divorce. And so I joined the United Methodist Church and began the process for ordination during my last year of seminary. That's how I became a United Methodist. And that was in 1995 that I became a United Methodist. So it kept unfolding. So then I graduated. I started pastoring these little churches in Appalachia. My first appointment was 3 little churches. So I would preach 3 times every Sunday morning and so on. And 5 miles apart, you can get in your car and drive to the next one, you know. And then I started my doctoral work at Duke University. I took all my languages first, and then I stepped out of full-time pastoral ministry so I could do my coursework and work as a teaching assistant for one of the faculty. And I graduated there at the top of my class. I graduated in seminary at the top of my class. And so that's how I got my education, and all the way through this higher education from college on through. My kids were also going through their education, but I also experienced profound healing. I really began to understand what my life what I'd endured, and how trauma affects the body and the brain and our spirituality. I learned all of those things, and I experienced so much healing. That healing is a lifelong process. It's never over. I continue to heal, and I continue to learn about trauma, and I do a lot of teaching and writing about trauma, and we do a lot of trauma work with people at Spring Forest, and it comes right out of this journey. So once I became a professor, I worked briefly at Ashland Seminary running their doctoral program, and then I was recruited to go to Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University, and I became a professor there and started a nonprofit there because they had asked me to teach evangelism. I never even had a class in evangelism, and that wasn't really, my doctorate is in systematic theology. And so I but I knew that God was calling me there, and so my husband and I moved there. And before we moved there, when we were living outside of Ashland with my first academic job, we had bought a farm and started a little community there that was actually the embryo of Spring Forest. So that was back in 2000, between 2003 and 2005, that we had that little community. And it had a lot of the features of Spring Forest, but needed to close all that down and move to Texas. And then there in Texas, I said to my husband, let's hold on to that dream. I know that God has spoken to me, that dream for that ministry with retreat, with earth care, with a farmer's market, market garden, and retreat space, and working with burnout people and people trying to find a real relationship with God. I know that that's going to happen in the future on a different property at a better time in our lives, so we'll hold on to that dream. So we moved to the city. I start working at SMU, and I start teaching evangelism from a very different perspective. And I taught about the contemplative life and living a life of justice around the environment and around social justice, around anti-racism and all the isms and phobias, living a life of graciousness and compassion where we actually help our neighborhoods to thrive and to flourish. And as I was teaching these things, I had my students reading Shane Claiborne and Brian McLaren and some other people that are writers. At that time it was called the Emerging Church Movement. And out of that, the students start coming to my office and crying every week. Different students, same tears, same story. It's like, Dr. Heath, I'm going to have to leave the church to answer my call. Help me know what to do, or I don't know what to do, because my denominational officials don't understand what I'm being called to do. And so I just started asking them, well, what is it that you're called to do? And they found it easier to say what they were not called to do than they could articulate what it was they were called. And it was they were not called to be in a traditional church setting. They were feeling called to be involved in food equity, to create something around food equity ministries, to create something around unhoused people's needs, to create something around refugee support. They were just kind of naming, and it wasn't that they were feeling called to go to a church and create a mission department that focuses on these things. They didn't want to do that. They wanted that to be the church, to fully inhabit a neighborhood in a way that's a blessing and that's culturally humble and all those kinds of things. And they were coming to me because of the content of this evangelism class. So I quickly realized that this was God's way of telling me how to focus my research and writing, and that it was time for me to create practical experiences in the city for these students to try out their call, because I learned from Betty and her role in my life, just get people and bring them along while you do the thing, and then reflect on the thing and figure it out together. And that's the way Jesus taught too, by the way. So that's what I did. I started a nonprofit called Missional Wisdom Foundation. After I started doing these experimental communities with students in the city, after a year, a man joined in with me who came to the school. He was in his mid-50s and had been a Wall Street banker for his career, and then felt called to seminary to help young people that are feeling called out of the church figure out what to do. So we formed a nonprofit and developed these communities. Within 3 years, we had a network of 8 new monastic communities across the Metroplex and 2 social enterprises. And people were coming from all over the country to see what we were doing. And we didn't have a website or advertise. It was just word of mouth of what we were doing. We had apartments in the refugee neighborhoods, and I mean, we just were doing a lot of things. This was all a side hustle, right? Meanwhile, I'm writing and, doing the things you do as a professor teaching. So it was out of all those experiences and seeing the impact of immersive education, where we could bring not only seminary students, but just pastors that felt like their lives needed to go in a different direction, and just people who wanted to learn a different way. realizing that in 3 or 4 days or 5 days of an immersion experience where we're eating beans and rice and singing in Swahili, and it's being led by people that speak Swahili, or we're actually having meals with unhoused people, and it's not it's a mutual exchange of friendship and eating together and cleaning the dishes up together and learning about each other's families. These kind of experiences will spoil your imagination on fake church forever, where you think that church is about sitting in a row facing forward and evaluating whether the sermon was good or the choir could sing. This gets under your skin, and you're never satisfied again without community. so I realized that more than ever, and I knew that was my calling to. That's where I need to go with all this. So pretty soon I got recruited to go to 3 different schools, United Methodist schools, to be a president or a dean because of the impact of the imagination this work was having. And that was all kind of amazing. And I didn't want to go be a dean or a president of a university, or a school of theology, because I knew how the pyramid of power works. And all of my best and most rewarding and creative work has always been done on the margins, kind of out here on the edge of the institution, half out of the institution. But the third one that recruited me was Duke Divinity School. And I showed the email to my husband and my spiritual director, and I was laughing, and I said, I'm not going to go there. I mean, I'm very flattered that they'd be interested, but this is because this is the premier school for the United Methodist Church. And it's very prestigious, and it's also extremely institutional. And I said, if I go there, I'll make them mad. They'll make me mad. It probably won't end well, But both my husband and my spiritual director, independently of each other, said, you really need to take this seriously. You keep getting these invitations, and maybe this is something God has for you, and you've just got an attitude about it or something. And I said, okay. So my spiritual director said, why don't you go and go to Duke and walk around and listen to what Jesus says to you. So I'm like, okay. So I couldn't get away at that time, but I did go on a retreat in order to focus on that question. Is this what I'm being called to? And I had a very profound and protracted call experience to go to Duke, where it was just as profound and detailed as the call experience that I had, in my early 30s when I was in Canada. And so I told my husband about it, my spiritual director. And by then, our house was a community. We were like the mother house for all these other intentional communities and things. So we agreed that I would apply, and I applied and eventually was selected for the next dean. And so we moved out here. And I stepped away from missional wisdom because I knew I couldn't do all that and be a dean at the same time. So that's how we got out here, and that was in 2016. It was not easy work. There was a lot of opposition to me because I was an outsider and I was the first woman dean, and my vision for theological education was way ahead of the norm is. It was about immersions and whole life and all sorts of things that I knew if the church is going to remain alive and relevant and helpful to people, it's going to have to change how we do theological education. And so I brought that vision into my work. I was hired specifically to lead the school. This is a mandate from the president and the provost of the university at the time, to lead a really robust DEI initiative within the Divinity School. That was the top priority. And the other priority was to lead the school in a new strategic direction that took seriously the radical culture shifts that are going on and what the different kind of leaders that the church will need for the future. So I was glad to take up those tasks, and so I put my shoulder to the wheel. There was a lot of conflict when I was there because change is hard and people get scared, and, institutions are hard. The whole nation at that time, now we're seeing it again, but the whole nation was in an uproar with institutions. Like institutions were having a hard time adapting to all of the chaos that's going on socially and politically. So I was there for a little over 2 years, and then I stepped down. I took a sabbatical so I could make soup and tend the goats. And when we got ready to move out here for that job, I said to my husband, now's the time for us to look for that property. Let's get that property where we can go back into that dream of the retreat space, the farm, and all the things. And when I retire from Duke, we'll do that. And so he was in agreement, and 2 of our friends moved with us who had been with us in Texas, an older couple, almost old enough to be our parents, really wise spiritual leaders. So we moved. I know the realtor thought we were all kind of weird because as we looked at different properties, not only were there the 4 of us, but we had some friends out here, so there were like 12 people going with us to look at all the properties. But we found our place. We found our house and knew immediately this is where we're supposed to be, and it was Spring Forest. And so that's how we got out here. And then right around the time I left Duke, the farm next door came up for sale, and was an organic farm and had a lot of resources on it. So through a series of remarkable circumstances, we were able to buy the farm. And a couple of years later, some new people came into our orbit, and they bought the farm from us so that we could share the costs of developing the missions that we do there. And it's all evolved organically. Today we have 34 acres. There are 3 houses and 2 tiny houses, barns and outbuildings, chickens, goats, cows. We have a robust children's ministry, family ministry on Wednesday mornings that's interfaith and multicultural around food and wellness and farming, and it's called Grow It. And we have 40 or 50 people every week coming to that, and we have a team of 7 people leading it, and from different countries and different racial backgrounds and economic backgrounds. They're the lead team for that, including a full-time chef and a part-time chef and some other folks with really great skills. Getting ready to start a farm-based preschool that will meet 3 times a week from one of the moms that comes to Grow It. And we also grow a lot of food for the food bank, and we started in 2025 free farmers markets for refugee families because the food the programs were cut in January of 2025, and these families were desperate. And so I went around and raised money from all the people I knew and kind of asked them to support it, and we raised $20,000, and it was enough to provide fresh, organic, beautiful produce for 20 families for most of the year. And we want to do that again this year. We also have a regular CSA where people subscribe and they come and get their veggies and eggs and fruit. We have morning prayer Monday through Friday from 8 to 8:30, which is a beautiful group. If everybody showed up at the same time, there'd probably be 40 people on that, maybe 50. We use a Celtic liturgy for that, and that's the heart of our worship life together is morning prayer. We've just this past year built out an art studio and gallery, a little art studio and gallery with a huge deck, and had a lot of electricity put in so we could have bands play. And so we had our first big music and art event in November. It was called Vesta's Venetian Carnival. And we had artists from all around and people from all around the Triangle come. And they were wearing costumes. It was kind of like a cross between steampunk and Midsummer Night's Dream vibe to it. But they had their art displayed, and we had beautiful Italian food. We had strolling musicians, and there were dancers, and campfires, and magical twinkle lights, and light shows in the forest. And it was so wonderful. And the goal there was to start creating more community among artists and to help people see that Spring Forest is a resource for the arts community, because we see art as a deeply spiritual endeavor that is prophetic, it's healing. When the social and political climate is in chaos like it is now, the artists are the ministers. They're the preachers that are telling us the truth we need to pay attention to. And there's a beautiful community that forms around art. So that's one of the things we're doing. And we have book studies, and we have protesters in our community that go and protest and do direct action. We have educational programs around human rights, forced migration, indigenous rights. All these things that are happening now have emerged out of the gifts and passion of the people that come and are part of our community. They're not just things I cook up and then ask people to go do. It's not like that at all. It's coming from the people. And while I'm ordained as a United Methodist, and I've been appointed to lead Spring Forest by the local bishop in the North Carolina Conference. We're very ecumenical and interspiritual in how we function and what we do. So we have a Muslim woman on staff, and we've got people working for us and that are part of our just gathering that don't identify as Christian, don't identify as religious at all. We have one strident atheist who helps to clean the goat barn every week because she loves to. She loves us and we love her. So there's no coercive element about religion. We're allergic to that. We practice a decolonizing form of our faith. I'm going to drink some tea now.
Please, please. Thank you. Thank you so much for explaining that and spelling that out. Besides the abusive ex-partner, it sounds like you've had and are having a very rich life,
Yes.
very fulfilling life. Now, I want to go back. I mean, you spoke a lot, so I have to go back. I want to go back to when you were in London.
Mm-hmm.
You said how you inspired your kindred spirits on how to stay peaceful and level-headed during a tumultuous, abusive experience. Mm-hmm. Explain that how, if you can. Like, what exactly did you do?
The biggest shift for me was coming to the awareness that I could detach emotionally from my abusive partner. I did not have to allow his mood swings and whims to control my peace, that I could detach from him emotionally. And I could do what is loving. I could be a good mom to my kids. I could keep the house the way I wanted it to keep. I could be creative. Whether he was going to do this or that. And as I began to realize I could emotionally detach from him, because for women, probably for men too, but I know for women who grow up with a big deficit in parental care, where we have to act like the parent in the house or the adult in the house, there's a distorted notion of what love is, and love is like taking care of people. You learn that loving is taking care of people, and I don't deserve being taken care of myself. It's a deep unconscious conviction. It's part of shame, right? So getting to this point where I realized I could detach from him emotionally, which Betty helped me to come to this awareness, then what that did was free me up inside, not always successfully, but I got better at it, so that I could actually think clearly. And I could decide, okay, he's being crazy. What is it that I need in order to be faithful to God and faithful to whatever I'm supposed to be doing here? So I began to be able to, I had space to think and reflect and to get more in touch with my own needs, my own longings, and which were all about having worth as a human being and also having freedom to be creative. I'm a super creative person, and I just need elbow room, and I need friends and I need community. And so I began creating those things with this space that was the inner space. That gave me courage to push back. So that's when I started pushing back at various levels. That was really hard for me to do, and at times I felt deep despair. When I felt deep despair, Betty would always help me to get out of the despair. She would just come and pray for me, and there was real power in her prayer. real power of light and goodness flowing into me. It was really extraordinary. But that's how I got started. So some very practical things that I did when I began that was I began to wear the clothes I wanted to wear, that I thought were beautiful and that were comfortable, and I liked the fabric. I made almost all my clothes, I was very thrifty. But that was an area of control he had that I took back. And I began to just socialize with my friends and not ask his permission. There were so many layers of control that I had to push back against, and one thing led to another, and sometimes there were violent arguments, but it was the trajectory that I was on.
So you taught yourself to assume your own identity.
Yes.
Because your identity sounds like it was attached to your ex-husband.
It was, and that was what the teaching was from the fundamentalist church, that you're almost an extension of your husband. You're not even really...
True, you're one.
Yeah, it's almost like your chattel property, basically. You have to do what he says. You have to have permission for everything. You don't get to own anything for yourself. It was pretty extreme.
So why was this hard for you to conceptualize and incorporate into your life? Was it because of the teachings in the church? Was it because you never had to assume your own identity growing up as a child? Where did the difficulty lie in this?
The church part was very...
The programming?
The programming was part of it, because I sincerely loved God. I still do. And I hadn't been exposed to alternative interpretations of Scripture. I hadn't been exposed to healthy feminism or, alternative readings of the... hadn't been exposed to any of that in terms of the Scriptures or Christian teachers or anything like that. There was also the factor, what I mentioned previously, that when you grow up you have to act like the adult in the house and you're 7 or 8 years old, you just think that taking care of people is love, and for them to receive your care is their love for you. It's not. That's not the way it's supposed to be. So you grow up, for some people, not even able to articulate what they want. You can ask someone in that situation, what do you want? And they're like, I really don't know what I want. If you could do anything you want in this world, what would it be? I really don't know. People, often women, will be kind of reduced to that sort of not knowing, because our agency's been taken away. And then when you've been sexually abused and you've been beat up physically, sexually, emotionally, spiritually, it imparts really deep shame to yourself and to the core of your being. And this toxic shame is not a sense of, it's different from healthy shame. With healthy shame, you're like, I made a mistake. I'm ashamed I made that mistake. I'll try not to do that again. That's healthy shame. Toxic shame tells me I don't belong anywhere. I don't matter. I'm fundamentally broken. I'm tainted. Nothing can make me well again. I've never been well. I don't belong here. I don't belong anywhere. There's nowhere that's home for me. And for people who are driven by toxic shame because of abuse and because of all sorts of reasons, suicide becomes an option for many people that are filled with toxic shame, because it's a sense of, I've got to end this misery and I don't belong. I'm just like a blight on the world. So when you have toxic shame and you're a woman who grew up having to take care of everybody, and you're in this religious fundamentalist environment in which God is the one relationship you have that feels like you get the message, God loves me, and you have experiences of knowing God loves you. That's why it was hard, because I wasn't in therapy. I didn't have these resources to help me understand how the violence had shaped me and had oppressed me. I mean, I was just trying to do the best I could. So, but as I took each step, it's always 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and it's always a spiraling journey of becoming well and finding yourself after you've experienced years of abuse. I progressively understood more. I progressively experienced more wellness. I progressively experienced empowerment. in a sense that God was going to help me and not be opposed to me for resisting this husband or this bad teaching. And then, so it just became more and more freedom. But the inner battle is the hardest part of it. And if you can do the inner work, then you will find the resources outwardly to help you move into a life of meaning and dignity and to be who you were created to be.
Did you ever struggle with suicidal thoughts? Or did it not get to that level?
Not really, kind of, but not really. When I would feel deep despair, I would just be immobilized by despair, and I'd feel like I can't ever have a life that means anything. I'd feel like I'm not even a person. I'm just I'm an appendage, And I met Betty when I was in one of those spaces, and she, of all people, was the one who helped me understand what was going on psychologically and spiritually in that feeling of deep despair. And through her prayers and her friendship and this group of women I became friends with, and just, opportunities opening up to be myself more and more, I moved out of that. And I don't think, once I divorced my violent husband, I can't remember ever feeling that depth of despair again after that. And my husband I'm married to now, we've been married for 25 years, and I met him when I was writing my doctoral dissertation. so and he's a wonderful man. But in some ways, I think about that. It's been 31 years, is that right? 33 or 34 years since I got divorced from my first husband. And in some ways, it feels like yesterday. I remember all that stuff so vividly. And in other ways, I'm like, I can't believe that was my life. I mean, how did I even make it? How did I ever get through some of those things? But it was God working through these beautiful people, and through, I suppose, a natural resilience that God gave me, and definitely through the natural world, through water and trees and sunshine, growing things. Mm-hmm.
Would you say being a mother served as like a pleasant distraction from that reality?
Yeah, not a distraction, but a place to pour my creative and loving energy. I tried my very best to provide my kids with things in childhood I never had, just simple things like playing with them, cooking together. I taught them all sorts of skills, and taught them how to roller skate, and I like to paint and draw. I'm artistic, and we would do these things together, a lot of fun times together, and I'd tell them stories at night and tuck them in and kiss them and say a prayer with them. I mean, I was reparenting myself in the process. I learned that later in psychology classes. I was just instinctively doing that. So that gave my life a lot of meaning and beauty. And I knew that was not all I was cut out to do, was mother these children, that I had this other call happening too. Yeah, my daughters are awesome. They're both professional women. One of them has a PhD in environmental engineering, and she works on river restorations. And the other one is a professional musician. She has a doctorate in piano performance, and she runs the classical piano department at one of the top boarding schools for high school kids in the arts in the world. So those are my kids.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
What gave you the courage to be open to another relationship after?
Yeah, that's funny. I was so bitter towards men.
Yeah.
I was just so bitter. I thought they were all complete jerks and not to be just leave me alone. But I had dated a little bit before I met Randall, and none of that worked out. But what it did was open me up to the possibility of having fun and, having a relationship with someone someday. The way I met him, I had just been appointed to Woodland Park United Methodist Church in McDonald, Ohio, which is a little steel mill village, a Carnegie steel mill village right next to Youngstown. This is where Randall's from. And so I go to serve this church, and I had asked to be appointed because now I was at the stage of my doctoral work to do my oral and written exams and then to write my dissertation. And I needed to support myself and my daughter. My daughter was in college by then at a local university, the younger daughter. So I start pastoring this little church. It was a really wonderful little church, and I could walk to do all the pastoral care visits. I could walk to see every parishioner. This is very unusual, but it's a 1 square mile village, and the people were all from there, so I would just walk everywhere. So I started visiting this woman named Nan Bell, who had cancer, and I didn't know how bad the cancer was because she didn't tell me at first, but of all the shut-ins, she was my favorite one. So I'd go see her once a week. And anyway, my daughter comes in one day with a newspaper, and she said, "Look, this car, here's a Mazda Miata. You need to go buy this. It's a convertible." And I'm like, and she's showing me this picture, and it was this beautiful little 1995 Mazda Miata M Edition, sort of midnight blue with a camel-colored top that comes down and leather upholstery, like all the bells and whistles. And I'd never had anything luxurious like that. And she said, "You need to go buy this car. Your Honda Civic's about to die. I can get my boyfriend to buy it from you, and he can fix it up and drive it himself. He's looking for an old car." And I said, "I can't drive that car." And she says, "Well, why not? You've wanted one since you were a little girl. You've wanted a little sports car with 2 seats where you don't have to haul people around. You can just drive it and have fun." And I said, "I can't do that. I'm already a single woman. I'm petite. I had blonde hair at the time." And I said, "What will the congregation say? I mean, that's a lot for them to deal with. What are they going to say if I peel out, in a convertible?" So she started hassling me, and she just sort of like shouldered me into, like, we're going to go look at this car. It was a used car. So we go, and I test drive this car with a 5-speed stick shift, and immediately loved it. And so I sold her boyfriend my old Honda Clergymobile and get this Miata. So I took it home, and the first thing I did was to drive over to see Nan. And it's in the summer. So I go, and the door's open. Here's the screen door. And I'm like, "Nan, I got this really cool car. It's a convertible." And so she hobbles to the door, and she says, "Oh, I've never ridden in one. I always wanted to." And I said, "Well, let's go for a ride." So I get her out there in the car. We don't leave a note or do anything. And we go for this long ride, and we go to a metro park. And it was kind of a hot day, so we were sitting in the shade with these flowers around. And she starts telling me about her taking her sons there when they were growing up. There was a little amusement park, and they'd have picnics. And then she said, "Pastor, I'm going to be dying soon." And that's when I found out how close, like, she was really in the last couple months of her life. I didn't realize that before. She said, "Can we plan my funeral while we're sitting here?" And I said, "Yeah, we can do that." So I had the most profound conversation with her. When you are with people, and this is the work death doulas do now, but how you are with people when they're preparing for their own death is such a sacred time. So we had this conversation, and in the process, she told me about her boys that growing up, and she said the youngest one was named Randall. And she said, "He comes over every week and every day after work and helps me. He cooks dinner for me and does all this." And she tells me he's such a good boy. He's 45 years old. She's telling me he's a good boy, and that he had been divorced for quite a while, and that he worked for the county engineer's office, superintendent of roads. What a good boy he is. And I'm bitter, toward men, so I'm picturing this sort of like big beefy guy with a beer gut and like a soft spot for mom, and a male chauvinist pig sort of person, because I'm feeling bitter, and then finally, so there's that picture in my mind. So finally she said, "I'm getting tired, Pastor. I should probably go home." So I get her in the car, and I'm wearing shorts and my hair's standing on end because it's humid, and we're driving with the top down, and all my deodorant's quit, and because it's hot and humid. So we get back to her place, and there's this giant F-250 Trumbull County engineer pickup truck in the driveway, and this lean, athletic-looking, thoughtful-looking man standing next to it, very disturbed because his mother's disappeared and he didn't know where she was. And he'd come over after work to get dinner and do all the things, and she's not in the house and didn't leave a note, and the door's open, the windows are open. So he had gone around to the neighbors. He'd called up his Aunt Ruby finally, who lived next door to me, and kind of kept an eye on me all the time at the parsonage. And she said, I think she went off with that new minister. So that new minister got a new car, you know. So wow. He was there looking very concerned, and I'm looking at him, and I just felt really self-conscious. So I'm like, So he gets his mom out of the car, and she was giggling. His mom was giggling, and that's my boy, you know. So I met him, but I just like took off like a bat out of hell. You know, I got in my car and I did peel out. I got to get out because I was just self-conscious and nervous. So that's how I met him. And then over time, as we moved through the rest of her life, it was a couple more months. Sometimes when I would go over to do my weekly calls with her, sometimes twice a week, he would be there after work, and we'd just sit on the porch and talk a little bit. So I got to know him a little bit. Then after, I realized when I was with him, I felt like I was by myself. Like I felt that comfortable that here's somebody who I feel at peace with. And it was just a different feeling. I never had that experience with a man. Of course, I left home and had to get married when I was 16. Anyway, I just felt like I was with a kindred spirit. And we would talk about this and that. And I also noticed that he was kind to his mother, that he was taking care of her when she needed help. And he wasn't all about himself. So I really appreciated that. So then after she passed away, probably a couple of weeks after the funeral, he calls me up and says, "Would you like to go have dinner tonight?" And I said, "I can't." He said, "Okay, well, what about next week or something?" I said, "No, I can't ever do that." And he said, "Well, why not?" And I said, "Because you started coming to the church that I pastor, and our clergy ethics, the pastor cannot go on a date with people in the church. It's not a good idea. We're taught not to do that." He said, "Well, it doesn't have to be a date. We're friends." And I said, "I can't do it." So we hang up the phone. This is when you hang phones up because there's a cord. And I'm sitting there in the darkened living room in a slump, you know, kind of like, I really like him. Maybe I could go with him. So then I just like called him back. "I'll go with you, but this is not a date." So he came and got me, and we went and it was a date. We had Italian food and went for a walk in the park. It was so lovely. So the next day I called my district superintendent, who was my supervisor, and I told him I was really perplexed what to do, and I told him about Randall, and he said, "Well, Elaine, where else are you going to meet somebody? Down at the bar or something? You know, I mean, if, you know, it's okay. Just let the chair of the pastor-parish relations committee know that you're seeing each other." And he said the reason for that rule is that if it doesn't work out, it can be very awkward for families and individuals if the pastor is broken up, or they, you know, it can be awkward. It's not good. So I said, okay. So we started seeing each other, and then we got married the next year.
Wow.
And it was fabulous. We've had a wonderful life together.
Yes.
He has been so healing. So healing. He's so committed to supporting whatever my work is and my vision, and he's got his own life too, and yeah.
Well, I'm so happy for you. That sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
And I can tell by your genuine smile that you really mean it.
I really do, yeah.
Wow. So, also, we're still in London. Mm-hmm. You said Betty taught you how to pray.
Mm-hmm.
And then that later on seemed to become a passion of yours, because you took that to Michigan, mm-hmm. and you were teaching other people how to pray. Mm-hmm. So for our viewers' sake, and for me as well, too, how do you pray?
What Betty taught me was as much by her example as by her giving me verbal instructions. Mm-hmm. Although I ask her at times about prayer. The one thing she taught me about prayer that has had the most impact on me which I now understand from a perspective of shamanism too, is that she said always gaze, pray. I'm sorry. The context for this conversation was I thought we should focus a lot on theology and doctrine and stuff like that when we are teaching these people. And she said no, especially with people who are new to faith, that's the last thing they need to learn, because that will turn them into Pharisaical legalists and stuff like that. She said, no, what you teach people is to always gaze at God, who always gazes back at us with infinite love. She said, gaze into the eyes of Jesus. Jesus is always gazing at you with infinite love. And if you practice this gazing, you will know how to decide whether theology is helpful or not helpful, what's dysfunctional. You'll have the interior knowing of what is life-giving. So she was teaching me to be a contemplative. She was calling forth my incipient mysticism. She did not use that language because of her traditional background, but that's what she was doing. And so over time, I developed practices that are contemplative prayer practices of gazing, of presence, of listening. Over time, once I got into seminary, I started studying the mystics, and I knew I'd found my people, my family tree spiritually, the mystics. And so I learned from them too, about the prayers of quiet and just noticing the movements of the heart, centering prayer, all those kinds of quiet prayers. And over the years, what I've learned even today, I mean, most of my praying now is without words at all. It's really about presence, about just noticing and leaning into the light, the divine light, and allowing the divine light to be in me and through me. So that's what I'm talking about.
So it sounds a lot like meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So your version of prayer and meditation go hand in hand.
Yes.
They're not separate.
No. I mean, we could quibble about silent meditation, and in theology we call it apophatic and cataphatic spirituality. Apophatic would be without images, without, it's strictly this sort of interior silence, and Merton and others wrote about it, Basil Pennington wrote about it, where this meditation technique where you get to an interior quiet, and as the thoughts come through, you just see them as like flotsam and jetsam on the river going by. You just notice them and let them go. That practice of noticing and letting go trains you to be aware of your own interior movements and spiritual movement from God, because you notice things. It's about showing up and paying attention. So that's one way. There are lots of ways related to that, this apophatic, where you're simply emptying. Then cataphatic spirituality and cataphatic prayer have to do with images and vision, and meditating on a particular phrase or scripture, or gazing at an icon, or gazing at a tree, or where you're engaged with some discernible thing, and to allow it to call forth from you whatever it's going to, however God's going to speak to you through that thing. So it's about being open and receptive and noticing. But all of those, whether it's cataphatic or apophatic, have to do with, I have a little mantra that I use in teaching, and I try to live this way for a very long time, is show up, pay attention, cooperate with God, and release the outcome. And by cooperate with God, for people who are non-deistic, I just talk about cooperating with love. What is loving and healing for our neighbors and for the earth? So show up, pay attention interiorly to my immediate context, to the larger context of our community, to the larger context of the world. So the prayer is really about showing up. It's about paying attention, cooperating with what fosters love, what is of love, And then release the outcome of that cooperation. Just trustfully release it. You don't have to be in charge of the outcome. And that's a way of life. That's a contemplative way of life.
Wow. So to encapsulate what you just said, it sounds like prayer to you is being present,
Mm-hmm.
breathing, feeling bodily movements,
Mm-hmm.
gazing. It's more so that than asking for something.
Yes.
Because a lot of times, I mean, not a lot of times, most times when people pray, like they're asking God, hey, you know, if someone is in a trying time, you know, asking for guidance, asking for clarity, asking for strength during these times. But you're saying none of that. It's more so sitting, feeling those feelings, detaching from the outcome, and just trusting in the unknown, the process of getting to your desired outcome without verbalizing it.
Yes, and even giving up a particular desired outcome. Let me get back to that other thing in a minute. Don't let me forget what you talked about, the request prayers, okay?
Request prayers, okay.
But one of the core aspects of my spirituality that, and I teach this and we try to live it at Spring Forest, in the New Testament, in the book of Philippians, which is a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote from prison, he talks about, he says, let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who though he was equal with God, did not consider equality something to be grasped, but emptied himself. He gave himself away. He emptied himself. The Greek word is kenosis, which means self-giving or self-emptying, where it's not all about me and my ego. And then Paul goes on, this is one of the earliest hymns of the church, actually, and goes on to say how this pattern that Christ set for us is now the pattern for us to take up. And so this mantra, show up, pay attention, cooperate with God, and release the outcome. The releasing the outcome, excuse me, is the self-emptying piece, where my ego doesn't need to decide what the outcome has to be. But I'm showing up, I'm paying attention, I'm going with this flow of the Spirit. I'm gonna, if we imagine the movement of the divine Spirit like a river, or air currents or something, I like to think about a river, that we get in the river and we swim with the current, we float with the current, we back paddle, and we go where the current is going, and we trust that the current, the river, has the wisdom to go in the right place, and we trust that when there's an obstacle, rivers know how to get around obstacles, under them, through them, they wear them down, they go up around on the bank, they do something. And so we're in the river, and the river is the divine presence, the divine loving intent that's universally benevolent and kind for all people and all things. And we get in there and go with that river, and we just don't try to swim upstream. I mean, that's not, or to control the river. We can't do that. Yeah.
And then prayer request?
Prayer request, there's a place for that, because when we have an intimate relationship with God, of course we're going to say things. We're going to say stupid things sometimes. We're going to ask for things. We're going to complain about things. But that's not the core, that's not the deep current of what prayer actually is. The deepest current of prayer is gazing back at God, who always gazes at us with infinite love and presence. It's just looking back and like, okay, we got this.
Wow. 100% agree. 100%. But I would also want to talk a little bit about your work currently now.
Yeah.
So you're a consultant, author, retreat leader, speaker, abbess, and farmer. But what does your work now focus on?
So right now as abbess, I lead our community pastorally and administratively. So that an abbess is a traditional name for a female leader of a monastic community. And we are a new kind of monastic community that has some things in common with old monasticism and some things that are just new and different. So I, have a sort of a CEO kind of role for our community. And so some of my work has to do with, we're going to talk about how are we going to raise that money so we can provide food for the food bank, and then we come up with a plan. So I do some things like that. I also help to lead morning prayer. I do spiritual counseling with people, things you would expect. I've done funerals and weddings and, things a pastor would do. I do some of that too. Then is the lead farmer right now. I manage the farm operation. Again, I've got a team. We have new employees and we have some volunteers. We've got a beautiful team. So I set the agenda for, and when you're managing a farm, when you're managing a CSA, it's not a flat consensus thing. You need a hierarchy. You need the person who's managing it to have their head on straight about what is needed. And when you've got a range of volunteers working there, you need to know who's capable of what so that you can send people to do different things and make sure they have their tools and stuff. All the while fostering loving community on the team. That's how we do it. So I've gotten as much training as I could along the way. I'll keep getting training on organic farming, and we have a new farm worker now who's a veteran biodynamic farmer, so I'm going to be learning from him. Even though he's answering to me, I'm learning from him because he knows so much that I don't know. And my hope is that within a year or two, I can step away from being lead farmer and hand that role over to someone qualified and passionate and trustworthy and so on. So I can devote more attention to spiritual leadership and teaching and that kind of work that I do. I get lots of requests for podcasts, so I can talk about things that we do and things that I've studied for decades and so on. I do a lot of guest speaking. During COVID and last year, it was mostly online. But now that we have sufficient farm help, I'm returning to a more active circuit of going and speaking at retreats or speaking at clergy gatherings and other places where I'm invited to come and teach. Of late, I've done quite a bit of teaching around trauma, and especially religious trauma and healing from trauma. And I've done that in different venues, everything from the Divinity School to the North Carolina Conference to the Council of Churches and all sorts of venues where I've been teaching about trauma and trauma recovery. I co-authored a book with one of my former doctoral students. It was published 3 years ago, called Trauma-Informed Evangelism, Cultivating Communities of Wounded Healers. And in that book, we really address head-on all the religious trauma caused by fundamentalism and by all kinds of colonization agendas. So it's a decolonizing and healing vision of what it means to actually live in the world in a way that helps neighborhoods flourish. So that's why usually the books are the reason why I would get invited to different things to teach and speak. So I do that. And then people come and have immersion experiences at the farm and spend time with me and with our team. So they can learn a different ministry model that is very different than what they've maybe grown up with church. We draw from the ancient Benedictine model for some things of, the Benedictines have always been self-supporting with farms or some sort of enterprise and following a humane rule of life together and things. So people come to have an immersion, to experience what this is like, and then it sparks imagination, and then they take that learning back wherever they came from and begin to implement in their own context in a very contextualized way what they've learned. And I still write. So, yeah.
So you mentioned how Spring Forest is almost like a new gen monastic community?
A new monastic.
A new monastic community?
Uh-huh.
I know that you have partnerships with other organizations, but do you have partnerships with other monastic communities, either in Hillsborough or just in North Carolina in general?
Not actually partnerships, but we have relationships with communities in other parts of the country. And increasingly, we're forming connections with other contemplative communities. In fact, in Orange County, in the last few years, there's been a real flowering of contemplative communities from different religious traditions and from no religious tradition, but from shared ecological values, that kind of thing. And so one of the people who leads one of those communities, the Avila Peace Hill people, approached me last week and said, hey, I think it's time for us to get our community leaders together from these different ones in Orange County and begin to think about how we might collaborate on some projects together that matter to all of us. And he said, I think you should lead that initiative. So I said, well, now that we have more farm help, I might be able to do that this year. I'm definitely interested in us getting together, but maybe I could facilitate it at least to begin with. So, yeah, let's see what happens.
Wow, I'm excited to hear.
Yeah.
Have you ever been a part of any other large-scale partnerships
Oh, well, we have relationships with,
or relationships?
yeah, schools, and I mean, we're all about networking and, helping the city to thrive.
What is an achievement or a milestone that you hit through a relationship that you're proud of?
Well, first of all, with Duke Divinity School, about 3, maybe 4 years after I left, I went back to the field education program leaders and said, we would love to have Duke interns here to help us and to work with us and to learn a different ministry model. And they said, great. And so we started receiving interns every year. We'd have 3 or 4 interns. And so that partnership is really important because it sparks the imagination of the students for what's possible. That this is a very different ministry model, and it's deeply appealing to so many students, especially who care about food justice and food ethics and food equity. Also working with refugees, and all those different things. So there's that partnership. With World Relief, that's our way to connect with refugees so that we can provide the free farmers markets. We started an ESL program with childcare and social events 5 years ago that now we've handed off leadership of that to one of our partner churches, and we focus mostly on the food, the free farmers markets and cooking classes, and they focus mostly on administering the program with ESL and so on. So there's that one. That's Pleasant Green United Methodist Church, by the way. Vesta's Venetian Carnival was our foray into the arts community. I mentioned that earlier. We had this event in November where local artists came. We have a studio and gallery now on site at the farm, and some gathering and event space in one of the fields. And so we had this really fun celebration of the arts that was sort of around this Italian Renaissance vibe with local artists and with musicians and good food and campfires to sit around, and the goats were there, and we had light shows, and the goats saw their first movie, and it was great. It was great. So that is a partnership with a local business owner who also put us in touch with a circle of artists that she knows from the Hillsborough area. So there's that partnership. We've partnered with Wake County schools. We've had many immersion experiences for students from Wake County, from the vocational technical school and other schools. Not just Wake County, but it's been dramatically increased with Wake County this last year, where they bring the students out for an immersion day. So students who are interested in a life in farming and food justice work and culinary arts come out, and we have this whole program we do with them, with our chef and our farmers and all the things. And we're going to continue to do those programs. We've worked with Trinity School in Durham, which is a prep school, a completely different social population, but they bring their 7th graders out twice a year. 50 7th graders and their teachers come out, and we have a day of immersion, and they help us plant sweet potatoes and wash the bus, and they also learn about what it's like to be a refugee, because our chef who came to this country as a refugee 40 years ago tells us what it's like. And so that opens these kids' eyes to what it's really like for immigrants who come here and bring their gifts and skills and have to struggle and find a way. And it's the immigrant, the refugee component of what we do that's most important to the Trinity School. With the Wake County kids, the most important part is vocational discernment around food and growing food and cooking food and healthy food. And so And I could tell you a bunch of other ones that we've done. So.
Wow, you are everywhere doing everything.
Well, it's not me, it's the people.
Well, it's the people, but I mean, I'm sure you're there to at least form those initial partnerships or the connections.
Yeah, I do the most of the, excuse me, I do most of the public relations kind of interface and connecting with people, because that's something I enjoy, and the way seems to open for me to do that.
Nice. So, what is your definition of religion, and what is your definition of spirituality? And is Spring Forest a culmination of both, or is it 100% spiritual? Because I know it's not 100% religious.
It's not.
I know that for a fact. So is it like an 80-20? Is it start off with the definitions first, in your words.
Okay. The world religions do not go back beyond it's a few thousand years, really. It's not that long relative to the geological record, right? The world religions, whether they're Buddhism, the Abrahamic religions, or whatever, Hinduism, they have an institutional component. They have a spiritual component, and they have a historic component. And I'm quoting from Friedrich Hegel when I say that, who wrote a trio of books. He was an early 20th century philosopher of religion, British. So the mystical element of religion is there, the historical, this is our history of what we believe and who was in charge and what happened. The mystical element is the spirituality piece, however it's expressed. And then there's the institutional element of religion. How do we make sure that we're controlling what happens, that we stay true to whatever our dogma is, and how do we pass on the torch to the next generation, and how do we organize ourselves, and what's the polity, and what do we do when people don't toe the line, and how do we ordain people? Okay, that's religion. It has those elements. Those elements are always at war with each other, or tension between them, let's say. And when one of them is sidelined too much, there's always a big mess, and then they have to come back into sort of a dance with each other. Religion has a place. It has limitations. And inevitably, religion has these cycles where it becomes a sellout for political power, for money, for whatever. It just happens, and then they have to have renewal movements in the religion. And so you can look at the religions and see this history. Shamanism predates religion. Some scholars say shamanism's been around for at least 200,000 years. Shamanism is indigenous spiritualities, I'm plural, from all over the world, from every tribe and people all over the world. Michael Harner is an anthropologist. I think he was an anthropologist who did some seminal work around what are the commonalities among shamanism all over the world. Are there some common threads? And he spent so many years, this was his life's work, and realized he articulated what's called core shamanism, which is core spirituality. That's where I'm going with this. And within core shamanism, there are probably 8 or 10 common features that you find all over the world throughout all time, from all sorts of different, as far away as the Inuit to, folks living in the jungles of Peru, where these sort of common threads are found. And those common threads are, in my judgment, they are at the core of healthy spirituality. And they are not a religion, but they can be, you can express core shamanism through the different religions for the most part. So they can actually be together. So for example, and this is part of my intellectual work that I'm doing right now, as well as my own spiritual journey in the last year and a half, has been around, okay, how does core shamanism speak to Christian theology, the theology that I inherited, that I studied for years, that I have a PhD in? And so, for example, core shamanism, there's some way, whatever God is called or the divine is called, the sense of unconditional love, that it's love that animates the universe. It's an intention toward good that animates the universe. And there's a sense that that goodness, that creative current and spirit inhabits all the things that have been made, that exist. And there's a sense that our mission as human beings in this world, we're part of the ecology, we're part of the interconnection of all things, which is really cool. This is, 200,000 years ago, this is quantum mechanics, so, the energy field. So
Yeah.
they all knew this, and so it's based around the energy field. But the interconnection of all things means that whatever I do is going to impact everything else.
Yes.
So I need to live mindfully in a way that's loving. So I need to attend to right relationship with the divine, with the earth, which is sacred, it's our mother, with all the things living on earth, even with the soil and the water, those are living things too. And with my neighbors who are humans, my neighbors who are animals. There's this beautiful, and you find this in indigenous spirituality around the world, so this sense of unity and interdependence and ecosystem. And then there's usually also a sense of the central role of forgiveness as we live our lives, because of this sense of all of us make mistakes, and then if you want to use the language of karmic load or karma, there's something about that. So I don't get to judge everybody as if I'm better than all that, because all of us have this journey. Whether you believe in reincarnation or this life's all we've got, there's a sense of consequence. And so one is to live a life grounded in forgiveness and mercy, but also with what we would call in psychology good boundaries. And there's a sense of respecting the boundaries of it's really quite fascinating, the link between healthy psychological awareness that we have today and ancient shamanism. There's so much overlap. So I'm looking at all these things, and I'm reading and experiencing conversation with shamans, and I'm like, this is the Sermon on the Mount. There's so much in the Bible, so many experiences. We could describe Jesus as a shaman. It makes perfect sense. We can certainly say the Bible is a library of ancient indigenous wisdom writings from the Middle East, from that indigenous group of people. So when you ask me the difference between religion and spirituality, I want my thinking about that to be shaped with this backdrop of the long, long history of the original spiritual directors, which are the shamans. Of course, shamanism, like every other thing, has this sort of crazy weirdo people that, that are not healthy, and are, there's a like sort of a flaky version of it that's not real. But that's true of all the religions too. I mean, just look at the news, just Google something, right? But so I look at it with this backdrop, realizing that we are all spiritual beings, including animals. And now research is showing us that even trees and plants communicate with each other and try to help each other in their own sort of plant wisdom, let's say. Robin Wall Kimmerer has written about that in Braiding Sweetgrass. I also think about the definition of spirituality. Ronald Rolheiser, who's a Catholic theologian and spiritual teacher out of the Oblate School in San Antonio. And in his book, Holy Longing, which is a great book, he says that spirituality is the fire in our belly. It's the fire in our bones. Each of us has that fire. And what is it that stokes the fire? That's your spirituality. And so I think about that, and how spirituality can't be contained by religion. Spirituality needs to be at least 1/3 of the force in religion, if not more. To me, spirituality and the nurture of the soul needs to be at the center of theological education. The life of the soul in the world, that needs to be the center. It's not. It's marginalized completely to the edge of most theological education programs. But that's what we need We need to nurture our spiritual life. We need care of the soul. That's the difference that I see.
And Spring Forest, it's founded on spirituality.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah, we're within the United Methodist institution. We are an experimental community, so we're kind of at the edge of the institution, figuring things out, and that's a good place to be. But it's like we're dual citizens. I feel like I'm a dual citizen. I'm a citizen of Christianity. I have my foot in the United Methodist Church. The church has been good to me and given me place to follow my vocation. But I'm largely also connected out here with people from other religions, people from no religion, very much connected to the interspirituality movement, where we're caring for our souls and our neighbors, creating containers for people to heal. So within Spring Forest, how religion and spirituality are expressed have to do with we are very much influenced by Celtic Christianity, which is an indigenous Christianity from among the land of the Celts, Scotland, Ireland, up in that part of the world. And so we're shaped by that. We use a Celtic liturgy for our morning prayer. And some of the features of Celtic Christianity are very important to us, like regarding the earth as sacred, that God speaks to us through birds and plants. I don't mean in a silly way. I mean to respect the sanctity of all the living things, because they carry God's love to us, and they have something important to say to us. Very much like indigenous North American communities, it's that the Celtic Christianity has those features. Franciscan spirituality with Francis the birdbath guy, also very creation grounded. So we take really good care of our land. We regard that as part of our missionship, our discipleship, or our mission. We believe that taking care of the land is as sacred as taking care of another human being. We also believe taking care of human beings is sacred and important. We see ourselves in an ecosystem, and tending the whole ecosystem is sacred work that will be good for our neighbors and good for ourselves, and definitely good for the earth and all the things. We also read the Bible. We read the Bible with a lot of hard questions. We do that every morning in morning prayer. And so we read and pray with the Bible, and we observe some of the traditional days of the church year, like Easter and, like Lent and Easter and Pentecost and Advent. But our way of celebrating those traditional church holidays, or seasons rather, is deliberately grounded in the earth too. So you could say that we have a creation-centered Christian theology and spirituality rather than a human-centered Christian theology and spirituality, which is different.
Yes. So within your circles with other theologians, with churches, do you see the world, we're speaking macro now, as much as we possibly can, do you see the world moving in a spiritual direction or religious direction? Because I feel as though a lot of churches are falling.
They are falling.
I don't know if it's because of the generation, this new generation. I don't know. We're just in such a bad place as a world right now that people are just losing hope 100%. But spirituality seems to be a lot more palatable with this new generation.
Yeah, we're in the middle of the greatest collapse of civilization in the history of the world right now. It's global in scope, and it's happening. We're in the middle of it. Margaret Wheatley has written about this in her book, Who Do We Choose to Be? And if viewers and listeners want to read that book, I highly recommend it. Everybody should read it. But get the second revised edition, which she wrote after COVID. She wrote the first edition right before COVID, and 80% new material after COVID. But she's an expert on how civilizations collapse and how community forms and how people live through the end of the world. There's a really good book. I can't think of the author's name right now. He's a Native American. We live through the end of the world, or how to live through the end of the world, and it's about living through genocides and it's wisdom from different Native American people. But anyway, several things are happening. When you have political collapse, you also have economic collapse. When these are happening together, political collapse, economic collapse, a collapse or a major shift in how information and communication happens. When the economy of the society radically shifts, it's something different, then that creates the conditions where religion also collapses or has to be reborn, whatever the religion is, because they're all tied together, these systems. So you could think about 500 years ago when, with the advent of the printing press, and then you have all these Reformation movements erupting in Europe, because now people can get copies of the Bible and learn how to read them and realize they've been sold a bill of goods by their local priest or whatever, and so you have all this sort of foment. There's also the rise of the market economy and all these merchants. There's all this going on at the same time. So we're in one of those times, only ours is, in some ways, I think, much more severe, because we have weapons of mass destruction. We have climate change that's going to burn us all up if we don't seriously do something about it. So the threat to our planet is much more great than it was 500 years ago. All of this has affected the church, right? So there are several things happening at the same time. Right now, there's I just read this study yesterday from the Pew. The Pew folks they do these national studies on religion and spirituality and what's happening. And I was reading it, how it looks like the decline of the church has sort of plateaued for now over the last just a few years, like 3 or 4 years or something. It was in a pretty steep decline before. There's a rise of the nuns and duns, the people that don't want anything to do with religion, the people that used to go to church or whatever, and they don't want to anymore. So there's an increase of them and a decrease of people that would consider themselves regular church-going folks, which regular church-going people now is once a month. It's not every week. The average is once a month. And the amount of time and money people give to religious organizations has plummeted also, kind of in tandem. But the interesting thing that I read yesterday is that women are leaving the church faster than men. And the reason why is the patriarchy, right? Mm. Women are being more empowered to just reject these kinds of things. And so like, I'm not going to go do that. So there's this loss. There's financial loss. There's credibility loss for sure. The church is really being pushed to the margins in terms of losing moral authority and everything because of scandals and surveillance culture. You can't get away with things like you used to be able to, if you're a corrupt church person. At the same time that's happening, there's a rise in fundamentalism. That always happens when there's social upheaval, when there's war, when there's political upheaval. You've got the blossoming of fundamentalism. So we have right-wing nationalism that's sweeping the globe now. It's definitely shaping the United States. And there you have religion, in our case Christianity, being co-opted to promote a particular political agenda, and it's violent and it's full of hate. That's going on, and there's a focus on trying to get young white men into this whole thing, and it's very patriarchal, and it's hateful, and it's very disturbing. So that's going on. And then historically and now, whenever you have these things going on that I just described, because of the movement of God's spirit of love and God's capacity to recreate things out of chaos, there's also a flowering of mysticism, of prophetic and healing people that are working in the margins. There's a flowering of some kind of monasticism that's really grassroots. And these little movements that form become the leavening agent in the chaos, both religious institutional chaos, political chaos, social chaos. They become the sort of seed beds for a way forward, for a life where people matter, where our gifts matter. And those little communities that I'm describing with, monasticism, that's a religious term. Margaret Wheatley calls those islands of sanity. And she says at times of collapse, the islands of sanity are what take us forward. And those are small, local, neighborhood-sized collectives of people who care about the future of this world, who care about the planet, and create community where people can creatively start solving unsolvable problems on a local scale. So we at Spring Forest have studied Meg Wheatley, and we believe that we're called to be one of those islands of sanity and to help support others form islands of sanity. In our case, the small, local, solving unsolvable problems, it's very small, very local. They've cut all the SNAP benefits in January, and we had a whole new group of refugees who were brought into this country, invited in, who worked for the American military before, and now have their food and support cut off. And so we said, okay, we have to pivot, and let's make sure we can grow food for 20 of these families. That's pretty small, but it's what we can do. So we, turn, and we're going to do that. And we've got some artists here that need some encouragement so that they can be the prophetic voices in our community. What can we do? We can have Vesta's Carnival, and we can begin to form these circles. We have people who have been harmed by religion, specifically Christianity, with toxic theology and patriarchy and racism and all those things. What can we do? We can have retreats. We can have morning prayer that is decolonizing, that's inclusive, that's healing of the earth, that teaches people to read the Bible from a completely different lens. We can do that. And so these things that we're doing, we know are how we are called to show up in this chaotic world as a spiritual community. We don't always get it right. We make dumb mistakes, but we try to have a spirit of grace toward ourselves and learn from our mistakes and get better at what we're doing. But that's okay, So that's what I'm talking about.
Sounds like your improved farming practices.
Yeah.
Came in handy right on time.
Yes, right in time, yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a couple things. You mentioned patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned how some individuals have come to Spring Forest due to being abused by Christianity.
Yeah.
So in a general sense, please share your opinion on what's wrong with the Christian faith. Because I read on your website that Spring Forest is at the forefront of a new reformation, one that is freeing the Christian faith from the sinful structures of patriarchy, racism, classism, many phobias, and extreme evangelism and mission. Mm-hmm. So if you can go into that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you remember that word I said, that Greek word, kenosis?
Kenosis, yes.
Remember what it means?
No, I don't.
Self-giving.
Self-giving.
Self-emptying. That's okay. Self-emptying. So, Christianity that heals the wounds of Christendom.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's our work. That's what evangelism has to mean now. We're going to devote ourselves to healing the wounds inflicted on the world by the church. That's our work now. That's pretty radical. To do that, we have to name and take responsibility for all the ways that we have used our religion to take and plunder and coerce and commit genocide and subdue and marginalize, threaten, shame, scare, burn up people and this earth. We have to take responsibility for all of that. by taking a hard look at our own history, our own theology, our own ways of being a spiritual community, and then change our ways. In the Bible, that's called repentance. It means to turn around and go the other way because you're going the wrong way. That's not going to be easy. It's going to be very challenging and painful. And the biggest opponents to making this move, the biggest opponent is the church itself, because it means suffering, you know. So all of the, I could just talk to you for years about this, but the violence against the earth is so much a result of bad theology around the earth and about domination and control. And it comes out of patriarchy. All those archies and isms are connected to each other. And so creating an alternative path is hard. First of all, we have to keep doing this hard work of owning up to our racism, up to our domineering ways, our sort of colonizing minds that we've inherited. And we've all, you know, anybody in the church has inherited this stuff. It doesn't mean everything about the church has been wrong or bad. It just means that it's been tainted by all of that. It's been perverted by all of that. So we have to get back to, okay, what is it's really about loving our neighbors and loving the earth and loving God and loving ourselves and living is those core principles I mentioned a little while ago. So there's the inner work we must do, but then there's also our relationship with the world beyond the church. It's been so harmed by all of this. No wonder people are suspicious. No wonder people, you know, when you say church, many people have a bad thing in their mind because of what's happened. And with the church being co-opted with right-wing nationalism right now, it's just exacerbating the situation, you know. So for example, it's going to be important that our person, Lisa, goes to Washington, D.C. with her friends and gets in that protest, and we're ready to spend the money to get her out of jail. And we have to have people showing up from our Christian perspective, doing the right thing, taking risk for our neighbor's sake, and not getting paid money for it or not getting something out of it. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. The other thing is learning how to give our resources away instead of taking everybody else's resource. That's another part of this new Reformation. And so at Spring Forest, we are doing that I'm bivocational. I don't get paid a salary for my leadership. I earn money in other ways. And the people that get salaries at Spring Forest are farm workers and facilities workers, and we pay a living wage for them. But, you know, I can earn money another way, and other spiritual leaders can earn money other ways at Spring Forest, so we're not paid. But, so the money that comes into Spring Forest, I don't have anything to do with that money. Other people handle the money. It doesn't come to me. And it all goes back into food for the hungry, support for the refugee, trauma support for people that need help connecting to medical care, you know, whatever little bit we can do. There are 1,000 ways that we have to learn to give ourselves away for our neighbors rather than looking at our neighbors to see who we can take from so we can meet our agenda and pay the light bill. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it's changing the perspective. Mm-hmm. There has to be some type of yin and yang.
Yeah.
When it comes to coexisting with each other.
Yeah.
And this world is all about greed. It's all about taking. Mm-hmm. Like you said, dominating. Uh-huh. And look where it's brought us. I mean, seriously, running ourselves into the ground.
Yeah.
And it's just like an elephant in the room. Everybody knows what we're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
But we do it out of habit. Yeah. Because we've been doing it so long. And we just refuse to acknowledge the fact that just because the wheel ain't broke doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. Yeah. But again, it goes back to ego. Uh-huh. This is a dog-eat-dog world. Mm-hmm. And that type of energy there's always going to be someone who's going to be suffering because of that.
Yeah, the most vulnerable suffer.
Yeah.
Animals, women, kids, poor people, whoever's at the bottom of the heap or in the margins. Yeah. And then if you inherit a theology that tells you that's God's will,
Which is crazy to believe.
but there are people that believe it. So trying to break out of that when you think it's God's will, and then you feel like even God is collaborating against you, that you have to cooperate with that broken system. So this is not going to be easy work to do, but it's the right work to do. It's what we're being called to do now.
And at least you're doing your part.
Yeah, we're doing our little part.
Because I think when it comes to making change, what kind of freezes people is, again, being attached to the outcome.
Yes.
Like, how are we going to change the world? How is this little, group or this family or this community going to change the world? And people get scared, they freeze and they just stop. But that's not how change works.
No.
If you make this one person's day better, this one community's day better, you serve somebody when you did not have to serve them. And then now you've just impacted, or you imparted that positive energy on them. Now they're going to take that positive energy. You made their day. They're now happy, and they're going to go out and impact somebody else positively. That's how you make change.
Yeah.
You think of it from a micro perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah.
There we get back to the shamanism and quantum physics.
Yes.
All the movements of energy impact all the others. And so when we do our little part, somebody over there does their little part, pretty soon the shift happens.
Yes.
The shift happens from this destructive energy into the life-giving energy. That's what we're called to do.
Well, Dr. Elaine, I could easily talk to you for another hour. I'm just being honest. I mean, your story, the type of person that you are, everything that you've triumphed over, and you've continuing to impart your light on the world is very inspiring. I mean, you said 23 years with your ex-husband? That type of tumultuous situation would harden somebody, would change somebody's perspective. We talked about, suicidal thoughts and stuff like that. But for you to go through that for 23 years and now you are, repositioning that energy to do what you're doing, it's phenomenal.
Oh, thank you.
It's phenomenal. And it's heartwarming. And I'm so glad that our paths crossed and I was able to meet you again for the second time and finally get your interview out for everybody. But I just want to give you one more space or one more opportunity. If you want to leave anything with the audience, any lasting words, any lasting comments before we call it off or call it quits today.
Thank you so much. It's been a joy to be with you again.
Yes.
And I so appreciate your deep listening and your good questions.
Yes.
I just leave the mantra: show up, pay attention, cooperate with God, cooperate with love, and release the outcome. And if you live that way every day, magic happens.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Elaine.
You're welcome. All right.